Greetings, adventurer. Welcome to the cellar. You look like you could use a drink. You don't have a cup? Well, we certainly need to fix that, don't we? Lucky for you, I'm in the middle of polishing all of these, so I've got them all out. How about I go through a little pros and cons list for each one? I'll talk about some of the history and how to take care of each single one of these, and don't worry, I won't take up too much of your time. You look pretty parched. Let's start off with ceramic cups. These, as you can see by the display, are actually the most numerous of the cups that I have, and that is going to be the first pro for ceramic or earthenware cups, mugs, tankards, etc. And that is that they are going to be probably the easiest one to get your hands on. Ceramic cups have the wonderful benefit of being able to hold both cold and hot liquids, and that is pretty much the main criteria by which we're going to judge all of these, is whether or not they can also hold hot liquids. Because when you're out on an adventure, you never know when you're going to just need a cup of coffee, if that is available to you, or a nice cup of tea, something medicinal if you're not feeling too well. So these can certainly do that. The biggest con with a ceramic cup is when it comes to actually adventuring, actually traveling. These, depending on their size, can be a little on the heavier side. And I know that some adventurers, especially when they're at fairs or something like that, when they're not actually packing in with a huge pack, will tend to wear a cup on their belt with some sort of strap. And a cup that has a weight such as this not only may be a little bit uncomfortable on your belt, it's also potentially going to pull at that strap. And if it's being fastened with a button, something that can easily unsnap, the weight of one of these cups may just be enough to undo that snap and then fall off of your belt. Which brings us to the second con about ceramic cups, which is that while they tend to be very, very durable, they can also be very, very easy to break depending on the situation. If you're wearing it on your belt and you bump up into something, or it just gets knocked around in your pack a little too much, they can shatter. And once they do, you're not going to be able to fix it probably with the kit that you've got out in the field, or if you just happen to be at a fair. Once these things are broken, you pretty much just have to get a new one or find a potter who can repair it for you. If you are actually able to find an unglazed version, they might actually survive a trip into the coals of your fire, so you don't have to worry about your cup cracking if you were going to use it to boil water directly from your fire if it isn't glazed. And that just has to do with the way that heat is making its way into the cup, how quickly the material is heating up. Historically speaking, ceramic cups may or may not have been used depending on the civilization and time period that we are talking about. Ceramic was of course available in the general European medieval period, as can be seen in a lot of depictions of pipkins and pots, things that people were actually cooking with. Now when it comes to caring for these, aside from making sure that you don't break it, these probably are one of the easiest types of cup to care for. And that is because you don't have to worry too much about any of the liquids seeping in, any flavors seeping in, and then staying in the cup permanently, which means that you can get away with maybe not washing it as frequently as you would some of the other types of cups, which we'll get to later, if water is not available to you while you're on the road. There are of course specialty online stores such as perhaps Medieval Collectibles, but I prefer Townsend's as they have a variety of stoneware feast items. Renaissance fairs are going to have their fare of potters. In fact, you probably even have a local pottery store near you with an artist that is hand making items, and you might not even know that you have it, but they tend to be fairly common. In fact, this one here is one such cup. This was made by a local potter and it has a very unique shape to it. And the bonus of getting to go to a local shop, or perhaps if there's a stall at a fair, is that you can actually pick up the cup and decide whether or not the weight suits you, whether or not it fits into your hand nicely, because that is very important when you're picking the cup that is going to be with you for all of your travels. These might also be sold at a variety of gift stores in your local area, or if you happen to be traveling. For instance, I got this one in Bath. And you might even find options at like a home goods store that just comes in a regular set for your dinner table. This is a completely contemporary mug, and yet it doesn't look like it, does it? This could absolutely fit in our adventuring time period, and it just came in a set of other mugs. And lastly, thrift stores. You can thrift pretty much any mug of any shape if you happen to get lucky enough, so there are a lot of different options for ceramic mugs. Let's look at the next type of cup here, the pewter mug, the pewter cup, the pewter tankard. Now, interestingly, if you would like to do your own reading, I do have some articles that I found very helpful that are going to be down below. But there is some terminology in the one about pewter specifically that I think we can really draw from, and that is that a tankard is a mug that has a lid, whereas a mug is simply this shape that doesn't have a lid on it. and a flagon is a serving vessel, so they tend to be bigger. So you would very rarely probably drink out of a flagon by itself. You would use the flagon to convey the liquid into a mug or a tankard or a beaker. So this is a pewter tankard. Now, a pro about these, incredibly durable. Now they may bend, they might get dents, or they might scratch, but you're going to have to try very, very hard in order to actually destroy one of these. Theoretically, you could put a hot liquid in this, but it would become very difficult to hold onto, especially if there isn't a handle here. I'm not entirely sure I would trust it. I personally don't put hot liquids in my pewter cups. But they do also come in a variety of different sizes. The con of these is, of course, that one, they tend to be heavier. Even the small one is heavier than a small ceramic cup of similar size, but it does look very nice. But my biggest con, the reason why I don't carry this one, even though I do like the idea of a lid, keeping bugs out of your drink, keeping leaves out of your drink, the problem is, especially if you're wearing this on your belt, but even if it's in your pack, it's very noisy, which in an adventuring context, you might not want to have to fight too much of your own equipment if you are trying to pass that stealth check. Historically speaking, pewter mugs like this might have been common in the Middle Ages, but I personally have seen that pewter as a whole tended to be 16th to 18th century, which is perhaps another reason why the fantasy medieval period is not actually medieval at all. There is a video if you would like a more in-depth conversation on that. They're very easy to care for, they're not going to rust or anything like that, and similar to the ceramic mugs, they will survive not being cleaned after every single use. These can be obtained at party stores for fairly cheap, although the quality of those is not going to be as robust as some of these. Those are going to dent and bend much, much easier. I got both of these from a thrift store, so very lucky finds there. Even some more modern options like a Moscow Mule mug could work just fine. So an option that I personally favor and one that I have been experimenting with is actually a mug made out of wood. Cups have been made out of wood for pretty much as long as wood has been around. We can see here in this picture from some finds from the Mary Rose, which is the Tudor period, 1500s, that wooden flagons potentially, or maybe very large mugs were being used, and those tended to look a little bit more like barrels, with multiple pieces of wood that have been glued or otherwise fastened together in order to form the cylindrical shape. Now this is more in line with what I would call a kuksa, though a kuksa, to my understanding, is generally carved out of one single piece of birch burl, which can be a little bit hard to come by. So I would call this more kuksa inspired because it's not really a birch burl. But wood, for its pros, has a very long list. The first one, of course, being it is incredibly durable. You can drop this. I wouldn't do it on purpose, but it's not going to get banged up. It's not going to deform. It's not going to dent, and it's also not going to shatter. But we'll get to some things that can hurt it a little bit later. Depending on the way that your wood cup is finished, it will have the ability to have both hot and cold liquids. If it's finished with beeswax or brewer's pitch on the inside, it's probably not going to be able to take a hot liquid. But if it's raw like this one, it will be able to take a hot liquid with some seasoning. In addition to being very, very durable, wooden cups can also be very, very light depending on how they're made, which is another bonus if you are indeed traveling. Now, some of the cons with these, if they are raw, like this one is because I want it to be able to hold hot liquid, they do require a bit of care and a little bit of seasoning before they're going to really be super effective. A simple way to season a wooden cup is to simply bathe it in, say, cutting board oil or vitamin E oil, something food safe, so that it swells those pores up so that you don't have those leaks anymore. That worked just fine for me. You may have to repeat that process again in the future because one of the biggest problems with a wooden cup is that, depending on how it's made and finished, they can dry out and crack, especially if exposed to heat without there being liquid in it to help dissipate some of that heat effect. So they're not unbreakable, but in terms of everyday wear and tear, they're very, very durable. But they do require some care. Now, in terms of viability historically, a wooden cup I feel is fairly easy to justify. If a civilization had access to wood, they probably made cups and bowls out of them, unless they actually had something way better, but wood is a very solid choice in my opinion. You will notice that I actually only have one of these, and that is because I have found wooden cups to be fairly rare in the market. Lots of woodworkers are going to be selling mugs or tankards of some sort made out of wood if you are going to a Renaissance fair or some sort of other fair like that. I haven't seen them too much in shops around. I also haven't seen very many in thrift stores or any other modern store. There are specialty shops online though. If you're wanting to get something like a kuksa, the bushcraft community has a lot of different sites and a lot of them are going to carry kuksas as well. And if you are interested in this specific model of mug, you can actually purchase a version of it from me. I have partnered with the Native Texas Craftsman Company and they have designed these. These are handmade out of Texas pecan wood, and at the moment they are a Patreon exclusive item available for purchase. That is partly because pecan wood is a little bit hard for them to get at the moment, so they can only make so many of them. I do also have a store which will be open officially to the public in the coming week with lots of items made by them, and I've got lots of plans for the future too. Sponsors for Living Anachronism can be few and far between, so I figured why not just sponsor myself? Next, we'll move on to something which surprised me as being very historically accurate, apparently, is the leather cup. Now, I wasn't able to find any primary sources on the existence of leather cups, unfortunately, though I did look, but what I found is, of course, down below. But leather cups, despite being a little, perhaps, eccentric and striking me as a little odd, they actually make a lot of sense if you are living in a civilization that has access to a fair amount of leather. But a leather cup is very, very light. And depending on the make, this one is hard. It's very durable. Now, I wouldn't sit on it or step on it or throw it across the room at a rock, but I'm not too worried about these. They'll get scuffed up eventually, but I'm not too worried about them actually breaking. And the fact that they're very light makes them very easy to carry around, whether they are on your belt or in your pack. And the biggest and pretty much only con for me when it comes to a leather mug or tankard is their inability to hold hot liquid. But that comes with a caveat, because there are actually some ways around that. If you have a mug like this that is sealed with either beeswax or bruised pitch or some sort of traditional resin like perhaps pine, you are not going to be able to put any hot liquid in this. But there is an option to have a modern epoxy instead, food-safe epoxy, and that will probably be able to hold hot liquid. I know that there are some makers that do that. And there is also an option like this, which I received as a gift from my lady friend very recently. It's actually a leather shell, and on the inside there is a ceramic insert, which can, of course, hold hot water. But now we're essentially back into the ceramic territory in that this could potentially break easily, and it's also on the heavier side. So it's not a perfect solution, but it is a solution that exists. Now, when it comes to the maintenance of a leather mug, especially one that is sealed with a more traditional option, such as beeswax, they're going to need to be resealed periodically. I've had this for a number of years and I haven't had to reseal it yet, but even if it's a little bit too hot outside and you just leave it sitting in the sun, there is the possibility that it could begin to leak. But leather on the net is just such a versatile option. In fact, when it comes to trying to make your own cup, leather is probably the easiest out of any of these, unless you happen to already be a potter or you already happen to have pewter or maybe tin that you can work with. Leather is probably the easiest thing to repair if it gets damaged, and it's probably also the easiest thing to make a new cup if you need to while you are on the road. In fact, maybe I should do that. I might try to make a leather beaker and just see how easy it is. Let me know if you'd like to see that. Because leather cups are sealed with something on the inside one way or another, they don't really need to be washed after every single use. It's probably better to do that because you are dealing with very organic material in terms of the leather. But if the whole thing has been soaked in beeswax and the whole thing is waterproof, I would dare to say that it's going to be as easy to care for as a ceramic or pewter mug. In terms of getting your hands on a leather mug like this, Renaissance fairs are a great place to go to, and there are, of course, lots of online shops that sell them as well. Leather mugs and jacks were also apparently found on the Mary Rose, which again dates to the Tudor period, which is medieval. And we already know that leather travels very, very well in an adventuring setting because of leather costumes like this one back here. And I dare say I would find it very interesting to start seeing more leather used to make bottles in an adventuring setting, and also perhaps even potion bottles and vials, simply because they are so unlikely to break compared to glass. Which brings us to the sort of option that I don't have here, which is glass. And despite it being a very good option when it comes to a feast or banquet, and potentially even more historically accurate than some of the options that are here, glass, in my opinion, is just simply not viable when it comes to actually traveling. Its weight to durability ratio is not good at all. They tend to be very heavy depending on the size and the thickness. The more durable it is, the heavier it's going to be, and the lighter it is, the easier it is to break. And when it breaks, it becomes very, very dangerous. I would say even more dangerous than ceramic. Ceramic could certainly hurt you if you step on something or a very sharp edge catches your skin. Ceramic shards could still cut you, but glass is almost guaranteed to do that. So the final option that I have is the drinking horn, of course made popular in Westeros with this sit-down bottom. I personally haven't seen that horn mugs like this that you can set down are actually depicted in historical art or archaeology that I personally could find. Again, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. From what I have found historically, if someone were going to be drinking from a horn, it would more likely look something like this, the actual horn, and probably be used for a ceremony of some sort. The pros of a horn are that it is very light, pretty much as light as leather, if not even lighter, and they can be very, very durable. Again, none of these would I choose to abuse, but a horn like this is not going to just shatter if it gets knocked, most likely. Lots of them tend to be sealed with something like beeswax, especially here on the bottom if you are getting one that has been made to sit flat, or they can be sealed with something else, perhaps some sort of modern epoxy, but either way, a horn should probably never have a hot liquid put in it because the heat will actually cause the horn itself to deform, and that is obviously not something that we want. They can also be fragile depending on the thickness of the horn, and because it is a natural product, it can be kind of hard to gauge what it is you're going to get if you're not buying it in person. For instance, this one, which I did get at a gift store at Stonehenge, actually, the handle is quite thin, and I'm worried that eventually I will be able to just break it off if I work it too much, so I also don't choose to take this one with me when I'm going on journeys. As much wonderful character as it actually has and how well it fits in my hand, it's just not quite as safe of an option as the leather or the wood, in my opinion. And especially if we're talking about ones that probably are more historically accurate, that are just a single horn. They can come in various sizes that way, but you can't put them down unless you have a holder for them, so again, not super practical for traveling, in my opinion. Now, personally, when it comes to just pure adventuring, on paper, leather and wood are my favorites, but in practice, I actually find myself going for the ceramics instead, and I believe that is for the simple reason that I have so many of them. They are essentially disposable at that point. And while I do have favorites, ones that I tend not to take because I don't want them to break, there are ones that I simply found here or there that I like. They're very interesting, but I don't care if they break. And eventually, while you're an adventurer, your equipment is going to break. And so for me, when it comes to picking out a mug of choice for my adventure, I tend to find myself reaching for the mugs that I care about the least first. So now we've gone over all of the options, and remember that you can, of course, always do extra research. If one of these struck your fancy, but you're not quite sure if it works for you, I encourage you to do your own research. But I know you look thirsty, so allow me to pour you a glass and wish you good luck on your adventures.